Forktales, a podcast that feeds the food and beverage world. Forktales is brought to you by Pavone Group and Vigor, a branding and marketing agency for restaurant, beverage, and hospitality brands. Learn more at vigorbranding.com. If you love what we're serving up, please give Forktales a 5-star review on your podcast service of choice. Think of it as a tip for good service.
Hello everyone, I am joined today by my good friend and our guest, Dan Costello. Dan is the CEO of Home Run Inn Pizza in the Chicago area. Now, Home Run Inn Pizza, it says a lot right there. Dan, you want to say hello and give us a little backstory?
Hi guys, Mike, good to hear from you again. So Home Run Inn is a family-owned pizza establishment in the Chicago area. We have 9 local restaurants, including one that is a partnership in Midway Airport. We've been in business since business started in 1927, and the pizza business started in 1947. And we also, along with the restaurants, we have frozen pizzas across the country. So we're nationwide with various retailers like Albertsons, Safeway, and then we're regional with other retailers like Walmart and Kroger. And then, find ourselves in the Southeast, Southwest, and covering coast to coast. So that's the core of what we do.
Yeah, it's an amazing story. And so it's super near and dear to me, not only your friend, but with Vigor, we're obviously really passionate about restaurants and restaurant brands. But Quench, another company we own and have started, it's all CPG. So you cover both worlds. So this is really super intriguing and, as I said, near and dear to my heart. But let's talk about how did you get started? You're a busboy at age 13. You want to talk a little bit about the early days of Dan's career?
Sure. So like I said, I'm 4th generation. So it's family business. So we grew up in it. We were encouraged, especially very early, to come into the business. So I started when I was 13. I started as a busboy at our original restaurant on 31st Street on the southwest side of Chicago. There, store's still there. It's doing really well. So grew up on the restaurant side of the business. So that's back in it's probably back around 1984, 1985. And my uncle, who unfortunately no longer is with us, that's when he really started making a big push to try to take our restaurant product into the frozen retail section of the grocery stores. So he was kind of the driving force behind that. In 1987, he built our first factory, which is behind that original restaurant. Still there today. We still use it. We have a main facility now out in the suburbs of Chicago and Woodridge, Illinois. But that's that was kind of the advent of the frozen pizza goes back, it's grounded in the roots of our restaurants. Making par-baked pizzas for people, cooking them halfway, people taking them home. So my uncle was just kind of like, we got to figure out how to do this on a grocery type scale.
Very cool. So, okay, it says on here you're also a sausage grinder. Now, some would consider me a sausage grinder in my role now, but can you talk a little bit about that? You started as a kid. You're a sausage grinder. This is the sausage thing. From what I understand, pepperoni is the number 1 topping in the United States, except for in Chicago.
Chicago, Midwest, maybe in Milwaukee too. I'd have to check with the people there, but we know in Chicago the number 1 pizza topping sausage. It dates back. I mean, it's historical. I mean, we just got a lot of Eastern European that settled here, and they went with sausage. So, we did everything from scratch. We make our dough. We blended our sauce, and we would. One of the jobs I had as a teenager, which was definitely we had a butcher shop. I worked in the butcher shop. We'd get in pork, and we'd have to take the bones out. So, and then we'd cut it, and then we'd grind it. So I guess it's sausage grinder, that was a job in the past.
So I love some of the history of it. I mean, it was started in the restaurant. I mean, I think you told me the story, and I've noticed it before I knew you. Round pizzas, but somehow you guys decided to cut them up in little squares. Why did you do that?
Yeah, so the history on that is, so my grandfather got out of the war. So circa 1945, right? And he comes back and he's looking for a job, and he was, he was a mechanic by trade, but he couldn't get a job. So he went to work for my mother-in-law, who owned a bar called the Home Run Inn, and so he's working at the bar for a couple of years, and he had come up. He's from Italy, he's from Bari, Italy, so he has a version of pizza. My grandmother encourages him to show it to my great grandmother. So they start making it in the restaurant and giving it away to get people to come in to drink. And so what they did is they cut it into small, tiny squares. That's why Chicago tavern pizza is cut in squares. At least this is, from our perspective, this is how it started for us, because they needed it to fit on a cocktail napkin. They didn't have plates. They didn't have china. They weren't a restaurant. They were a bar, and they were just trying to get people to have a little snack, buy another beer. So that is why our pizzas are cut into tiny squares, and a lot of the pizzas in Chicago, because that's how it was introduced. It was introduced as we're one of the first pizzas in Chicago. We started in 1947. We believe that, there might have been another one or two competitors that started in 44, 45, but that's how it came to be for us. Cocktail napkin, had to fit, had to give it away.
That's fantastic. Can you tell me the story? Because again, it's such a cool history. So your uncle's in the pizza shop. Talk about how you got into the CPG side, the frozen pizza. I mean, that's like everyone's dream. Whoever makes or has a restaurant, they want to do a dressing. They want to put it in the grocery stores. Everybody thinks it's easy to jump to CPG. How did it all start with you?
All right. So, I mean, if you really go all the way back, the story goes back to the 50s for us, where a customer comes into the restaurant. So my uncle's young at this point, and he's just probably hanging out. And the gentleman comes in, and he wants a pizza, and he wants it to bake it halfway. He tells my grandfather. So we call that par bake today. The guy's just like, bake it halfway. And my grandfather he said, why don't you want this cooked all the way? And this was our first frozen customer. He goes, I take it home. I'm going to put it in my freezer, my ice box, right? And he goes, I spend the summers up in Wisconsin. So he goes, I want you to make me a dozen so I have them for the summer up in Wisconsin. And he goes, and so our original frozen pizza was 10 inches because a 10-inch pizza would fit in an ice box because it wasn't freezers back then, right? So people had ice boxes. So I think my uncle saw that. So then the 60s come around, and actually we had a bartender who's like, hey, why don't we make more of these? And on my way home, I'll stop at the corner grocery store. I'll drop them off, and then I'll see how many they sell. And on my way back to work the next day, I'll pick up the cash on how many they sold, and I'll bring it back. So that's even our first distributor was our bartender. He would take the pizzas after work. He'd walk them down to the corner grocery store, pick up the cash the next day, bring them back. So my uncle's grown up in the 50s and 60s watching this, and restaurant expansion happens in the 70s. He's working on that, and he just has this this vision that, hey, there's probably a better way to make these pizzas, freeze them, and get them into the local grocery store. So he really started investigating that probably in the 70s. And then in the 80s, he starts talking to the local grocers here, which back then it was Dominic's and Jewel. Jewel's still here. Dominic's is no longer here. But those were the two big grocery brands. And he starts selling them, and he then starts figuring out how to make it. And the only way he knew how to make it was to make it like we made in the restaurant, which was to make it in this par bake format. So he'd make them in the restaurant, he'd put them in the oven, he'd par bake them, he'd throw them in the freezer, he'd wrap them, and then he'd start selling them in the grocery store. Then year over year, he just tried to figure out, how do I do this better? How do I get automation in this? So he had to learn this whole thing. So our frozen pizza production facilities really model and mirror what we did in the restaurants all these years. And my uncle would tell you today, if he was still with us, he said the reason we make it like that is because that's the only way I knew how to do it. So
that's awesome. Yeah. I was fortunate. I was actually with you on a tour. You gave us a tour, and I was able to try it right there, par baked, and it was delicious. And then we actually we went to the restaurant and compared a frozen to the restaurant pizza. And I say this because it's true. It was almost as good. And I mean, almost as good, which I think says a lot. Everyone loves pizza. I've got this terrible saying that pizza's like sex. It's all good. Some's better than others. Right. So I just think that I was amazed how close and how good the frozen pie was. And I just was. It was tremendous.
I mean, the process is real similar. So I give him, like, he had a very clear vision on how he wanted to do this. And, he spent a lot of years, because equipment had to be developed over, back in the 70s and 80s in order to do this. And he was integral in working with people and saying, this is what I needed to do. How can we do this? And, got us to where we are today. So it positioned us really well. And, so we have a healthy restaurant brand, and now we have a healthy CPG brand. And, the restaurants really drive that brand awareness and the marketing side for the frozen pizza. I mean, that's what makes us a little different than a lot of our competitors. You look at the competitors in the freezer case, there's really only one or two that have restaurant background and roots. California Pizza Kitchen's one, and that's about it. You can find a couple regionals here and there, but there's not a lot of people who do both.
Right. And with all due respect to California, pizza shouldn't really come from California, right? It just doesn't feel right.
No,
yeah, it doesn't feel right.
Yeah. We'll be kind. We'll be kind, right? So.
So talk about the relationship between the restaurant and the frozen product, the CPG product. One drives the other drives the other. I mean, it's a neat thing, because a lot of people have one and they want the other, right? And somehow it just kind of organically happened with you.
Yeah, I mean, again, and it's the way that the business grew. I mean, we call it our flywheel now. Really, these restaurants. We started in 1947. And today we feed over 2.5 million people a year out of our restaurants.
Wow.
So for us, it's if the most if the deepest level of connection with somebody is that type of taste experience, it's a really difficult marketing to duplicate, with just pure dollars and say, hey, try my stuff. We're actually our marketing is feeding people, having them talk about the product and enjoy the product, and create these great experiences at our restaurants, which is why we do a lot of the restaurants allow us to be parts of the community. Once you're in a restaurant, we can work with your local Little League. We can talk to you, with your school. We can be part of the community, which then gets people to understand our brand, know our brand, trust our brand, and then that trust we know translates to when they're walking down the frozen aisle at the grocery store. So the synergy, a lot of people ask us, like, well, doesn't the restaurants hurt the frozen, or the frozen hurt the restaurants? We don't see it like that at all. We see it very, very synergistically, and thankful that our product translated from a restaurant into a CPG brand. It's a hard thing to do. And I know, like you said, like I've learned from you, a lot of people, this is what everybody wants, but it's not an easy trick, right? It's very difficult to pull off. So I'm sure timing had some to do for us. I mean, Joe was an early adopter and moved on this early in the career, the life cycle of Home Run Inn. So I'm sure that helped. I think the fact that it's a good product, it's a really good product, helps. I think that we're dedicated, and our teammates are dedicated to making it the way we do and to be parts of the community. That helps. So it's all these pieces have to come together, so you can gain trust with the customer, so that they'll continue to invest in you, right, and continue to purchase that product. So that's where that's how I see them working. The parts of our business, they're complementary, and they both depend on each other.
Yeah. And it's this very, I think it's a very pragmatic way to go about it. I think it's smart. They just should feed, literally, no pun intended, off of each other, because they're both great brands. And the restaurant might have more history, but because of the history, it allows that flywheel, if you will, to capture the CPG side. And again, then the product's great. So you get the product in people's mouths, and the rest is history. You talk a lot about your uncle, and obviously 4 generations of family owned and operated. How important is family owned and operated for the brand?
I think it's really important. I mean, we're very proud of it. I know my brother and my cousins that I work with. There's a lot of pride. I mean, we grew up in it, so it means a lot to us. When we don't do a good job and we hear from our customers, take it very seriously. I think you don't have to own something to care for it that way, but I think it certainly doesn't hurt, that we're very invested in it. So it's important to what we do, who we are. I think it's important to our teammates. I think our teammates enjoy and like knowing that we're here and that we're involved, that we're not absent owners. I think that's a really important cultural aspect of a family business. If you can be a present owner, I think that's meaningful to the people that are helping you build the thing. We can't do this without our teammates. I mean, we got over 500, and I kind of view it for us is that we owe it to them to be present and in the trenches with them as we do this every day.
Very cool. I mean, people always say when you own restaurants, and restaurants have always been in my family, and it's like, you've got to be there. Right. And then, couple that with a brand, when I put I'll say my marketing hat on, a brand is a promise. Right. And, many times an agency's hired to create that story or try and build that authenticity. And what's beautiful about what you have is it's already baked in. I mean, again, just right there, family owned and operated. Everyone cares. It started with the restaurants. There's a story, a history, a reason for being, and then it just kind of goes from there. It's just really a natural concept, and it's just wonderful. I mean, we talk a lot, about controlled expansion for any brand. What are some of the mistakes that you've seen pizza franchises or chains making? They're popping up everywhere. When expanding into, say, new markets or maybe a new way of doing the same thing or new concepts, and maybe hit a little bit about what are your thoughts on expansion? I mean, do you have anything that you're looking forward to in the future? Is there anything that you have in the back of your mind or anything you want to share?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we've made plenty of mistakes. I mean, some of it it's the world's changing and how people are using restaurants is changing. So I think you have to be in tune with that. Like we're not that interested in opening up a 250 seat pizzeria anymore like we did back in the 80s and 90s, right? You have to pay attention to that. And sometimes you're a little slow to identify that trend. I mean, even though it's been coming for a long time, like we're recognizing now for us to grow our restaurants, we have to do it differently than where we came from. I think, overall, I've always been confused when I talk to people that are in the restaurant side of the business in particular, and they tell me they're going to a new market and they're going to open up 50 stores. And I'm like, that's great, but how, like in 2 years or 3 years, I'm like, but how do you know they're going to work? Like, for us, we probably take this might be part of our company culture and history. I mean, like we've been in business since, the 1947 started making pizzas, and then actually the bar business goes back to 1927. So we'll probably take more of a cautious approach, like open up 1 to 3 stores and how they work, how you doing. I've always been fascinated. People open up, but again, it's probably most of these are franchise systems. They're looking at they have different desired results than we do, different desired outcomes, right? So our desired results is when we go to a new market is this restaurant going to synergistically support and facilitate growing our frozen CPG brand? Mm-hmm. And if it doesn't, do we need to do it? Right. So we have those type of conversations all the time because, the frozen brand's growing, and the restaurants we've been a little bit more stable on the last couple of years, just trying to get through this pandemic and get through hiring. But we're looking at some opportunities where we think we can go to other marketplaces outside of Chicago and do the same thing we did in Chicago by tying our frozen business and our restaurants together.
Love it.
And the biggest thing we want to accomplish is build. I liked how you said earlier a few minutes ago that brand is a promise, right? And so that's what we want to do. We want to make sure that our brand is building trust with our consumers, right? It's a promise to them. So for both the restaurant and the CPG side. So I think, with expansion too, like what are you going to do differently? What's the value proposition for people? And what value are you going to serve for them? And we want to just be in that position where we're one of the only pizza brands that we can help you, whether you want to come out or you want to stay home, we can be there for you, right? Mm-hmm. So there's nobody else doing that.
Yeah, and you nailed it too. I mean, obviously, your goal is not to slap a sign up in every town in America and just pump stuff out. It's not a franchise. It's not. These are company-owned stores, for lack of a better word. And I also think it's really, really smart how you look at them as marketing, how they play off each other for the frozen side. I think that's a really smart way to go about it. I love that concept. It just makes, to me, it makes all the sense in the world. Okay, I'm going to ask you a couple questions here, and hopefully these answers don't get you in any trouble. So these are very, very difficult, high-level pizza questions. Okay, pineapple on pizza, yes or no?
No. Warm
right?
pineapple just is gross. I'm sorry.
feels a little California, doesn't it? All right, dipping pizza in ranch dressing, yes or no?
No.
I love it.
It means the crust isn't any good.
That's right. Thoughts on white pizza?
Eh.
Okay. Deep dish pizza, is that still pizza?
Yeah, sure. I think so. I'm from Chicago. Deep dish pizza's pizza. Yeah.
I was going to say you could alienate some locals if that one.
Yeah.
That's a little tough. And how often do you eat pizza?
2-3 times a week.
Nice. And anchovies on pizza, is that something?
Not
yes,
for
no?
me. It's not for me. Yeah, not a lot of people in our market do it. But yeah, we have a little bit of it, but it's not much. I don't see a lot of it in our stores.
I think that was like more of a big East Coast thing, and I felt like it was maybe a whole generation ago. I remember doing it. I remember hearing about it. I actually ordered one time, and I love pizza. It's like one of my favorite things in the world is to open a box of fresh pie. And I did it one time with anchovies. I thought this is going to be exciting. I'm going to try this. It was godforsaken. And I actually like anchovies. So I was like, no way, ever again, never again. So
yeah, I don't see it a lot. I'm not seeing it come up at that much. I mean, even when I was working in the restaurants every single day, small percentage.
That's funny. All right. So my very last question, I'm going to actually take pizza off the board here. I don't think you should be allowed to say that or answer with that answer. But last question, if you had one final meal, what would you eat, where, and why?
Oh, man. What would I eat, where, and why? Jeez. That's probably a question I think if you ask me, it probably changes based on my time of year, my mood and whatnot. But I think at the end of the day, I'm going to go with a steak, right? I'm going to go with a classic of, great steak and steak and fries, right?
Nice. There you go.
Where would I have that? I'm not 100% sure. We got a lot of choices in Chicago. Gibson's comes to mind as one of those a place that just never disappoints. There's this place down in the city called Bavette's Beef, just fantastic, great owner operator there. So I think those would be a couple of things that pop in my head about where I might want to spend a last meal. So hopefully I don't have to do that anytime soon.
I hope not. I hope. Yeah. Any last things? Anything else you want to say? Anything you want to leave us with?
Well, Ron, this was fun. I really appreciate you having me on. I think for anybody listening, this is the first time I've ever been on a podcast. Hopefully I did okay. So
it was fantastic. I thought it was great. And I love, you're one of my favorite people and I always enjoy talking to you. So it's a layup, right? It's just easy.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun. But yeah, to anybody listening, keep going out to eat, right? Restaurants and grocery stores need you. So yeah, we'd love to keep serving you.
Fantastic. Dan, thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
You got it, Mike.
Awesome.